This is note taker 27 on fish and amphibians. This note taker is our final phylum, which is going to be phylum Chordata, and every animal that we're going to talk about on the next three note takers are all members of this phylum because they are vertebrates. A vertebrate is an animal that has a backbone. So characteristics of all chordates. They have a notochord, a spinal cord, and a throat with gill slits at some point in their lives. Now obviously you're thinking, well, I've got a backbone, I'm a vertebrate, but I don't have a throat with gill slits. When you were a developing embryo inside your mom, yes you did. But we were not meant to have gills, so as we developed, ours closed up. Now, some of our animals, which are going to be on this first vertebrate note taker, our fish and amphibians, are going to breathe through gills at some part of their life, and some of them through their entire life. Now, gills are the feathery structures, and as the water flows over these structures, oxygen diffuses in, carbon dioxide out. Now, with our vertebrates, we can break our animals with backbones into two groups. They can either be cold-blooded, also called ectotherms, and if you look on the wall, ecto means outer, therm means heat. Warm-blooded animals, also called endotherms, and if you look on the wall, endo means inner, therm still means heat. So with our cold-blooded animals, ectotherms, they cannot produce their own body heat. So this is where the ecto part of their name comes in. They must rely on the outside temperature to warm up or cool down. So our vertebrates have three groups of cold-blooded animals: fish, amphibians, and reptiles. So with these three groups, they must rely on the sun for heat and shade for cool. Now with your fish, it's a little bit different. Your fish will change their location either up closer to the surface or down deeper in the water to get warm or cool, and it will determine, or that will also depend on the season. Your warm-blooded animals are going to be able to make their own heat inside their body. So that's where the endo comes inside. So warm-blooded animals would be our birds and our mammals. Our first group of vertebrate, and the first vertebrate to actually evolve, would be the fish. Fish are going to be water-dwelling, cold-blooded vertebrates, and they are characterized by having fins, scales, and may have throats with gill slits. With our fish, fertilization can either occur internally or externally. When we talked about arthropods on the last note taker, we said everything else is going to be sexual reproduction. So with this fertilization, internal fertilization means that they must mate and the sperm unites with the egg inside of the female's body. External fertilization means that the female lays her egg and then the male will swim over it and release sperm into the water, and it will fertilize the egg outside of the female's body. With all of our vertebrates, they are all going to have a closed circulatory system, which means they have blood vessels that their blood will pump through. And the blood is responsible for carrying nutrients and oxygen to our cells. Fish are going to be our first group that have very well-developed nervous systems. They don't hear very well. They do not hear very well. Actually, a lot of shark attacks occur because sharks get confused at what they're hearing in the water. They can actually just pick up sound vibrations and currents from the water. So if you're splashing around in the ocean playing, you sound, or the vibrations you give off, sound a lot like a fish that's hurt and struggling And that, unfortunately, is how a lot of shark attacks occur. They don't come after you on purpose. A lot of it is mistaken identity. Now, even though they can't hear very well, their sense of smell and their sense of taste is amazing. If you were to put a shark in, let's say, a swimming pool, a couple of drops of blood dispersed within that swimming pool, it would be able to detect there is blood in that water. So they have a very keen sense of smell and that taste, and that's what drives them and allows them to find food. With our fish, we're going to break them into 3 groups. We have jawless fish, cartilaginous fish, and bony fish, and you are going to have to know these 3 groups. Our jawless fish do have skeletons that are made of cartilage, and if you're not sure what cartilage is, if you take your fingers, put them up on your ear, and you can feel how you have a hard structure inside your ear, but it's very flexible. That is cartilage. Our 2 species of jawless fish are the lamprey and the hagfish. In the pictures below, the lamprey is the picture on the left, and that's a close-up picture of its mouth. And yes, those are little tooth-like structures that will actually bore itself into the food. And then the picture on the right is a hagfish. Hagfish live very deep on the bottom of the ocean. They have very tiny eyes because they don't need it because there's no light down there. They do hunt by sensory smell and taste. And hagfish actually have another neat thing about them. They have these little openings down the side of their body, and when they feel threatened, they release this protein into the water. And as soon as the protein hits the water, it explodes and becomes this big glop of slime. That way, if they feel threatened by another fish, if another fish is trying to eat them, they will get this big glop of, like this big, just hunk of slime around them, and the other fish can't get near them because the slime will actually clog up the gill slits of these other fish. And when the other fish, the predator fish, goes away, the hagfish will just swim out of the slime and he'll be fine. Again, the lamprey and hagfish are jawless fish, so they have a very unique way of eating. I will show you a video of a hagfish eating in class. Our second group, which are cartilaginous fish, again, they're going to have a skeleton made of cartilage. However, they will have a set of jaws. This group is going to include our sharks, rays, skates, sawfish, and a special little fish called a chimera. And the picture at the bottom, what you're seeing is a close-up, a magnified picture of scales covering the bodies of some of these animals that I just mentioned. With a shark, it has toothed scales. So if you take your hand, if you were going to pet a shark, not suggested, but if you pet from the head back towards the tail, it would feel just very rough and bumpy. But if you were to start your hand at the tail region and pet upwards towards the head, each of these little tooth-like barbs on the scales would actually rip and scrape your skin. The top left picture is a chimera. He lives very deep in the ocean. The bottom right picture is a shark. And here is a picture of a ray. The 3 pictures I just showed you are all examples of cartilaginous fish. Our last group of fish are bony fish, and they're going to actually have a skeleton made up of hard bone. Now with our bony fish, they are all going to have paired fins. So if they have one, they're going to have a second one that's kind of its identical match on the other side of the fish. And they're going to have a special structure inside called a swim bladder. When we talked about the air bladders with algae, I told you about the example of little kids at the pool with the little water wings, the little blow-up things on their arms, and it helps them float. A swim bladder inside the fish is very similar to that. A fish will change the air pressure in that swim bladder to either be more towards the surface or deeper in the water. So it actually affects the buoyancy or the ability for the fish to float. Your bony fish are going to have a lot of the fish that you would eat for food. Top left, we have a little seahorse. Seahorses are very unique. I know they look a little odd, but they're very unique bony fish. I'm going to actually show you a video in class of a male seahorse giving birth. It is actually the male that gives the birth. The bottom right picture is a rainbow trout. Top picture here is one of our little tropical angelfishes, and you can see very brightly colored. You would see them swimming along coral reefs in tropical waters. And the bottom picture is a yellowfin tuna. You can see the yellow on his fins, and very good eating if you like that sort of thing. Moving on to our next group of vertebrates, amphibians. Amphibians are also cold-blooded and are fish-like in the fact that they breathe through gills when they are immature. Some of them, as they go through their change and develop into adults, actually lose the gills and will breathe through lungs and moist skin as an adult. However, there are a few amphibians that will keep their gills throughout their life, and I will show you some pictures of some. With amphibians, some of them also have glands in their skin that contain venom, like a poison that would sometimes can actually kill you. And I've got a picture of one of those amphibians. With amphibians, they must live in a moist environment for two reasons. Some of them have gas exchange through their skin like an earthworm does, and that would be in addition to the lungs or gills that they use. The second reason amphibians must stay in a moist environment, and this is also what ties fish to water, although some of them can walk on land, but in addition, amphibians are kind of dependent on the water. They can't go far because their eggs do not have a hard shell on them. It's very gelatinous, like a very jelly-like egg, so their egg needs to be laid in a moist environment. Our young amphibians are going to have a single loop circulatory system, and as adults they will have a double loop circulatory system. What this means is that when they're young, their circulatory system, which is going to be their blood passing through their body, delivering oxygen around there, it's actually not as effective as a double loop system. So as young amphibians, if you look at the middle picture at the bottom, the blood leaves the lungs, carries the oxygenated blood until it gets used up, and it passes through all the organs back to the lungs again before it ever picks up any more oxygen. So there's not as much oxygen left towards the end. However, a double loop system is more effective, especially for the heart, because with a double loop system, your blood is going to pump to your heart, which then pumps it to your lungs to pick up oxygen, and then the oxygenated blood goes right back to your heart again, and then it gets pumped out to the rest of the body. So the blood that is being delivered to your heart, which is a major organ of our body, is going to have plenty of oxygen there for it. With your amphibians, they are also going to have, like our fish, a well-developed nervous system and sensory organs. Amphibians also sexual reproduction, but can reproduce with either internal or external fertilization. Internal fertilization means the amphibians must mate, and the sperm fertilizes the egg inside of the female. External fertilization, the female lays her eggs, and then the male releases the sperm over the eggs to fertilize the egg outside of her body. And with our amphibians, they do go through a complete metamorphosis as they develop. When a frog first hatches from an egg, it hatches as a tadpole, and then it goes through changes which allow it to lose its tail and develop two pairs of legs. Your salamanders and your newts will actually keep their tails. But if you look, and we talked about complete metamorphosis with insects, but if you look, a good way to remember, what it looks like when it's born, it completely changes before it's an adult. These pictures here are examples of our frogs and our toads. We have in the top left, we have a Colombian red-eyed tree frog. You can see that big bright eye. The one on the top right actually has flattened limbs, so it can actually jump from tree to tree and hold its arms and legs out, almost like a parachute to slow it down so that it can direct itself to the next tree. The two on the bottom, we have the little poison dart frog on the left, and we have a cane toad on the right. Both of these can be deadly to humans. Here we have examples of salamanders. And if you look, yes, that is how big the giant salamander gets. The guy is holding it, and I am going to show you a little video clip on that one in class. Now, with our salamanders, I know you kind of think that when you see them on the ground, they kind of look like a cute little lizard. The only thing with salamanders is you should never pick up the small ones, because oils from your skin can actually clog them up so that they can't get as much air exchange through, and you definitely don't want to hurt them. These guys in these pictures are going to be a couple of specialized amphibians that we have. The top one on the left, I'm going to tell you its name, and I'll even spell it because some of you want to go online and all of a sudden you want one as a pet. It is called an axolotl, A-X-O-L-O-T-L. And this little guy here stays aquatic its entire life, and the little pink things you see coming off the side of its head are its gills, and it keeps those gills through its entire life. These can be kept as pets. The one on the top right is a cave-dwelling amphibian, and you can tell that it's cave-dwelling for two things. First, it's albino white. A cave is totally dark. If you just turning off the lights at home, you don't understand what true darkness is until you visited a cave where there is zero light. So this guy doesn't need any coloration, so a lot of cave-dwelling animals are albino. The other thing is, if you look closely at his face, he's missing something. He's missing eyes. His eyes, he doesn't need them in the cave because, again, when you live in complete darkness, you have to hunt by sensory, not by vision. And you'll notice on his head, he also does have the external gills. He stays aquatic his entire life, and he will keep those gills on the outside of his head his entire life. He almost looks like a little dragon. The one at the bottom is specialized to be primarily aquatic through its whole life, although you see this guy sitting on a rock. But with this, they do have front legs, but they have a flattened tail in the back and have not evolved back legs. So this guy does pull himself up on logs and rocks with the front leg and will sit there, but the tail is very specialized for swimming. Please do not forget to complete the assessment on fish and amphibians following this note taker.